Style might seem like a shallow thing to talk about, but today we're going deep. I've been trying to figure out writing style for a long time, and I think I'm starting to get to the bottom of it. You know, in school I always heard that writing should be clear, and that a good style is one that sort of invisibly gives readers access to the things that you're trying to say. Anything that draws attention to itself too much or is somehow unnecessary is strictly forbidden. And this is a problem. That schoolish emphasis on plainness and clarity doesn't really match up with the kinds of things that I like to read and write. I can remember vivid and potentially unnecessary descriptions of food and scenery in the books that I liked to read as a kid, and even now one of my favorite experiences is to be caught off guard by an unusual usage of a word or a series of similar consonants in a poem. Maybe I'm just one of those people who pays more attention to how people say things than to what they say, but the fact remains that the usual rules about good style don't accurately describe the kinds of writing that I like the most, which leads me to think that there's more to style than we've been led to believe. So I'm on a mission to get to the bottom of what style is and why it matters, and I hope you'll come along with me so that we can move beyond the rules and really take control of our writing and our own personal style. Like rhetoric, style can be a tricky concept to define, particularly in the context of writing. So it might be helpful to think about style in a context that's a little easier to visualize, maybe something like clothing. What is it that we're talking about when we say that somebody has a sense of style? Well, we probably mean that they're good at putting clothes together in appealing ways. We might even say that their style is somewhat unique to them, or that it tells us something about who they are or who they hang out with. Painting in the very broadest of strokes, for example, the style of a young athletic person might be made of different kinds of clothing than the style of a retired English professor. Beyond that, a person with a good sense of style will probably know how to match their clothes to the occasion. It might be a stylish thing to wear a tuxedo, but it's a lot less stylish when you're meeting friends for pizza on a Thursday afternoon. And in general, we aren't too disappointed in people who wear bright colors or interesting patterns. When it comes to having a good sense of style in clothing, we don't insist that the things people wear should be as unassuming as possible. But for some reason, when it comes to writing, people do assert that kind of rule. As much as we might compliment someone for an eye-catching pair of shoes or an exquisite handbag, the rules tell us that similarly flashy flourishes in our writing can be distracting, unnecessary, or maybe even unseemly. And why is that? Well, I think that's because most of the conversations we have about style aren't actually about style at all. When we talk about writing style, we're generally talking about the linguistic choices that writers make, like the words that they choose and the ways that they arrange those words into sentences. So language is at the heart of style. But there are a few ways to talk about language, and it can get confusing because they all show up when we're talking about writing. At the most fundamental, we have grammar. It's the bedrock, the basic system of rules that tells us whether sentences in a language will even make sense. That's why colorless green ideas sleep furiously makes sense as a sentence even when it's actual nonsense. For experienced speakers of a language, it's really unlikely that grammar rules are ever going to be violated. And if we wanted to draw an analogy to clothing, grammar might be something like socks go on before shoes and hats are designed for heads. It's pretty unlikely that anyone will get those wrong. A level above that, though, we have usage, which, as we've talked about before, has to do with the rules that reflect certain cultural or societal norms for how things are expected to be. Usage isn't built into language the way grammar is. It's an overlay that reflects the linguistic manners of a time and place. When it comes to clothing, you might have heard rules like a gentleman's tie should not extend below his belt, or a gentleman should not wear brown shoes in the city at night. These rules are totally made up. There's no inherent reason not to wear brown shoes at night in the same way that there is an inherent reason to put socks on before shoes. It's just a societal convention expressed as a rule, but it's possible, easy, and totally reasonable to break it. And the same thing happens with language. Don't say ain't, never use the passive voice, omit needless words, never end a sentence with a preposition. If you break these rules, everyone will still understand you. They aren't rules in the language, they're made-up rules that exist in society thanks to people with exaggeratedly strong opinions. Our understanding of style doesn't really fit into either of these two categories, though. A person who likes to wear floral prints and who counts that a distinctive aspect of their style isn't really governed by anything like grammar or usage rules. true style seems to be something above and beyond those two categories. I really like what Andrew Inkpin says about language competence in his book Disclosing the World, and I think it's a pretty good description of what we really mean when we talk about style. He says, "It is true that both bad players and good players, football players say, must adhere to the rules of the game in order to count as playing it at all. But what constitutes competence, what good players have and poor players lack, is knowing what to do over and above the rules." Style, in this sense, goes beyond the rules. It's not about making sense or keeping rules. It's about some kind of quality that the rules just don't touch. For me then, I like to see grammar as something functional. It either makes sense or it doesn't. Usage as something social. It either fits societal norms or it doesn't. And style as something rhetorical. Something that isn't worried about rules, but focuses instead on effects. So, for example, if you're going to a black tie event, you can keep all the rules and wear black socks under your black shoes with your black tuxedo and keep a very low profile. Or you may opt for a more dramatic effect by throwing a flashy flower on your lapel. That's a choice that isn't governed by a rule, but by the effect that you want your choice to have. The linguist Deborah Tannen says that style is no more nor less than a way of doing something. And she points out that plain is as much a style as fancy. Again, reinforcing the idea that style has to do with the effect that our way of using language has on readers. It's not about right or wrong, and it's not true that plain is inherently better than fancy. So again, why have I always run into lessons about style that sound more like stern lectures about the things that you should and shouldn't do? I think it's because, like I said before, we're not really talking about style when we talk about style. We're really talking about usage. And if I had to point to a clear example of usage masquerading as style, I wouldn't have to look any further than that infamous little book called Elements of Style by Strunk and White. See, this book promises to be about style, and then starts with the elementary rules of usage, proceeds then to the principles of composition, which are also usage, wanders through commonly misused words, still usage, and then arrives at an approach to style, with such gems as place yourself in the background, avoid fancy words, and avoid foreign languages, which are all rules, not discussions of rhetorical effects. For example, one of the rules says that you should avoid qualifiers, calling them, rather extravagantly, leeches that infest the pond of prose. But those are not words to live by, especially if you're a scientist or scholar. Qualifiers have a particular effect, and while they can make your claims less forceful, that kind of dampening effect is exactly what you want if you're trying to be honest about limitations in your study, or you want to fend off overzealous detractors. So Strunk and White's Elements of Style might be a little more honest if it had the title Usage Rules for Writing More Like Strunk and White. The book isn't telling people what's possible over and above the rules, and it's not doing much to give them the rhetorical understanding of why they might want to keep or break those so-called rules in certain situations. And if you've ever written a paper and had to format it according to MLA or APA style guidelines, then you've seen another great example of usage being presented as style. Following MLA guidelines isn't really about having a particular rhetorical effect on your reader, it's about showing that you're a part of a particular group. You write in MLA mostly to avoid the embarrassment of showing up in brown shoes after 6 p.m. So we really shouldn't be talking about rules at all when we're talking about style. Instead, I think we should be talking about the choices that we have beyond the rules and about the rhetorical effects that those choices could have. So instead of learning usage rules and calling it style, we'd probably be better served by thinking more carefully about how our choices influence the effectiveness of our messages. Maybe something like Augustine's ancient stylistic suggestions that plain styles are good for teaching, but that fancy styles are better for delighting and impressive styles for motivating people to act. Because we live in a world that seems to have confused usage and style, we've ended up with an idea of style that revolves around the ideas of plainness, clarity, and honesty. Now, to be clear, I am pro-honesty, but this usage-oriented understanding of style is really limiting because it only gives us the tools to evaluate style in terms of how well our style stays out of the way of what we're trying to say. That is, the reason that people say that a plain style is good is because it's probably also going to be clear and less likely to distort or obscure the truth. As a result, a lot of what gets taught in school seems to focus almost exclusively on clarity. For example, Joseph Williams' famous textbook on style starts out by saying, "This book rests on two beliefs. It is good to write clearly, and anyone can," before it goes on to say, "Unclear writing is not just an inconvenience to readers, it is a social ill." I think what really gets me in all of this emphasis on clarity is that it doesn't really seem to say much about whether a writer's style is actually good, only whether a writer is probably telling the truth. And that's fine, but just as clothing style is about more than just avoiding public indecency, I can't shake the feeling that writing style is also about more than just avoiding dishonesty. Here's Exhibit A, Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem The Windhover, which goes like this. "I caught this morning morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dappled dawn-drawn falcon, in his riding of the rolling level underneath him steady air, and striding high there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing in his ecstasy, then off forth on swing, as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on a bow bend, the hurl and gliding rebuffed the big wind. My heart in hiding stirred for a bird, the achieve of, the mastery of the thing. Brute beauty and valor and act, oh, air, pride, plume, here buckle, and the fire that breaks from thee then, a billion times told lovelier, more dangerous, oh, my chevalier. No wonder of it, sheer plod makes plough down Sicilian shine, and blue bleak embers, ah, my dear, fall, gall themselves, and gash gold vermilion." This poem is decidedly unclear, and it does a lot of things that our supposed style guides would warn against. Unnecessary repeated words, fancy words, distracting rhymes and alliteration, way too many exclamation points, obscure phrases that rely on words being used in unusual ways, even, have mercy, French. If we really wanted to write this poem in a clear, straightforward way, we might say something like, "I saw an amazing bird this morning, and it was a religious experience." There's no way to misunderstand this clearer version, but, and it can't just be me, there's also really no way to care about this second version. If the poem really were as plain and straightforward as my exaggerated revision, it wouldn't probably have lodged itself in my memory the way the original has. And I definitely wouldn't have gone on to read anything else written by the guy. In other words, Hopkins' style is far from being transparently clear, but it's even further from being bad. Just listen to things like dappled dawn-drawn falcon and my heart in hiding stirred for a bird, and try not to grin. It's fun to say, it's full of energy and enthusiasm and wonder. I may not immediately know what Hopkins is saying, but I know right away how he's feeling, and I also know that I wouldn't mind spending more time with a writer like him. By now, you might be hearing echoes of our earlier discussion on Wayne Booth's essay, The Company We Keep. You can watch that video for more depth, and of course I hope you will, but for now, it's enough to remember that Booth argued that the writers and characters we spend time with when we read have an influence on us, and that we should pay attention to the influences that we allow into our lives. So for Booth, a book or movie or other piece of media is good if it puts us in contact with good company in order to share good experiences. So how do we figure out what kind of company we keep as we read, and how can we figure out what kinds of experiences we're sharing with them? The scholar Edwin Black argued, the best evidence in the discourse for this implication of what the author stands for will be the substantive claims that are made, but the most likely evidence available will be in the form of stylistic tokens. In other words, the strongest evidence for who we're dealing with will be the things that they say, but the most likely evidence will be in the way that they say things. Style tells us who we're spending time with. In that sense, the significance of style goes way beyond its ability to clarify or obscure the truth. Because we aren't in the same room with writers, the only way that we can get to know them is through what they write. And the choices that they made and the effects that those choices have will be the most likely evidence to help us understand who we're dealing with and the kinds of experiences that they're offering to us. If we're serious about the idea that a person's sense of clothing style is an expression of who they are, then it makes sense to say that we can learn something about a person based on what they're wearing, and something more than whether or not they're appropriately dressed for the occasion. And similarly, writing style is important because it's often the only information we get about the writer. It's the thing that links us to the writer and tells us about who they are. So, who is Hopkins based on his style? Well, let's turn back to the poem and see how this all works. First of all, he seems to be the kind of person with a deep reverence for the bird that he saw, calling it Kingdom of Daylight's Dauphin. Not only is he calling it a prince, but the line break in Kingdom, a deliberate choice, plants the seed of royalty even deeper in our mind. The way he gives such a royal treatment to the bird suggests that he's a respectful person who honors the creatures he comes across. Then he attributes ecstasy to the bird and takes his own ecstatic turn as the falcon arcs through a gust of wind, saying, "My heart in hiding stirred for a bird, the achieve of, the mastery of the thing," with a couple of exclamation points. And that leads us into brute beauty and valor and act, oh, air, pride, plume, here, buckle. Hopkins is totally caught up in the wonder of the moment, and his style reflects it. There's enthusiasm and beauty in the rhymes, a building intensity in the stack of single-syllable words, and a momentary release of pressure with the two-syllable word buckle. In other words, we're not dealing with a detached, cynical observer. Hopkins is alive to the beauty of nature, and that's reflected in the intricate beauty of his language. It's not a clear scientific report, but it's also not meant to be. Hopkins isn't just making small talk, he's describing a moment of rapture in rapturous language. And how could I not want to spend time with a writer who's so full of admiration and enthusiasm for the world and for language? So why does style matter? It matters because style is what connects us to the writers that we're spending time with. A good style isn't good only because it's easy to understand. Good style is good because it puts us in contact with good company and gives us experiences that are worth having. So Hopkins' poem isn't particularly clear on the first or maybe even third read, but it provides such an uplifting and delightful experience that I wouldn't have it any other way. And it's uplifting and delightful precisely because of its complex and melodious style. Any step towards plainer clarity would probably make the poem more mundane, lifeless, and pretty forgettable. And of course, you probably don't need me to tell you that a forgettable style is not a good style. In the end, style is more than we sometimes give it credit for. Thinking about our writing style means thinking about the rhetorical effects of the words that we choose and the sentences that we build, much in the same way that clothing style has to do with the effects of the pieces that we wear and the combinations that we put them in. As a result, style is more important than our clarity-obsessed textbooks would have us believe. Style isn't something to keep out of the way, it's a real tool for shaping the quality of our readers' experiences and for influencing the effectiveness of our messages beyond just transparent truthfulness. Because of that, there's more to good style than clarity, and there's a lot to be gained from more elaborate, playful, or evocative styles. Of course, there's definitely more that we can and will say about developing and refining our own writing styles, so stay tuned for more to come in the future. For now, though, I think Joseph Williams was right on when he said that our style is good, even ethical, when we would willingly put ourselves in the place of our readers and experience what they do as they read what we've written. Style creates experiences, so we can do a lot to improve our style by making sure that we're writing things we'd want to read. And with that, thanks as always for joining me on this stroll through style. More importantly, though, thanks to the very many of you who have subscribed to the channel this year. In the start of January, there were barely more than 50 of us, and now we're approaching 900. I'm always excited to see more people take an interest in the rhetorical perspective and then sign up for more. I mean, I think this stuff is pretty cool, but it's nice to know that it's not just me. So anyway, thanks for watching and thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you again real soon.